Ralghia the Witch, Chapter 2, Part 2. So he returned to Ralghia's inn. The innkeeper stared at the horse and carriage. "Noble sir," he said, "how do you plan to handle all these horses?" "Pardon?" "We don't have room for them, and 6 horses will eat a lot of feed. Have you made arrangements?" No." The innkeeper looked at the prince and smiled. "Ah, but I see you're a man of noble upbringing. I can take care of the horses for you, and surely a man as proper as you I can collect at a later date." Yes, of course." The innkeeper handed the prince a bill. "Sign here," he said. The prince signed the bill, then went upstairs to change for the evening meal. By the time he was ready to come back down, everyone was talking about him. The prince with the shiny hair stood at the top of the stairs and listened in. "It's true, I swear it. A prince has come to court our Princess Portia," a man shouted in a voice loud enough for the prince to hear. "How can you be sure?" another one asked. "I have seen his carriage, and what a magnificent coach it is, trimmed with gold, inlaid with mother of pearl, and pulled by 6 white horses. Now that's the sign of a prince." "Perhaps he better not make the same mistake the other prince made," a third man said. What do you mean? Don't you remember? He showed up in a fine carriage and the king and queen noticed. "Ah, yes, I heard the story. Princess Portia was looking forward to meeting him, but once he stepped out of the carriage, she was sorely disappointed, because the footman and driver were better dressed than he was." And they laughed at the thought. The prince blushed. "I hope this prince doesn't do the same thing," one of them said after a moment's silence. "Yes, surely it would break the heart of the poor princess if another prince were to turn out to be less than what she was hoping for." The men nodded. The prince looked down at his clothes and realized he wasn't ready to face the princess. The next day, the prince with the shiny hair went to Ralghia's tailor's and asked for a suit of clothes fitting for a gentleman. By the early afternoon, he had a full wardrobe. Day clothes for traveling, evening clothes for dining, riding wear for hunting on horseback, and more. When the seamstress was done, she patted him on the back. "There," she told him, "now you look almost like a prince." "What do you mean, almost like a prince?" The seamstress held his hand. "No rings," she said. "A real prince would have rings on every finger." Then the seamstress looked up into the prince's surprised eyes. "I'm sorry, sir. Forget I mentioned it," she said. Then she handed him a bill. "Sign here." The prince signed the bill and walked out. The next day, he went to Ralghia's jeweler's. The jeweler helped the prince select a ring for each finger. Rubies, emeralds, diamonds, sapphires, opals, and pearls adorned his finger, leaving no doubt that this was a prince. "Sign here," the jeweler told him. When the prince returned to Ralghia's inn that evening, he overheard what the women said. "A prince has come to ask for the hand of Princess Portia. How romantic. I hope he's a good dancer. It would be a shame if he were to woo the princess only to step on her feet during the minuet, or to fail at the waltz. Yes, that would be a shame. And he'd better be good at fencing, too. A prince isn't really a prince if his swordsmanship is lacking, or else how can he protect his princess?" "Yes, yes," the others agreed. The next day, the prince with the shiny hair paid a visit to Ralghia's fencing school. "I wish to learn to dance," the prince said. "Why, certainly, sir," the dance master said. "Which dance do you wish to learn?" "All of them." "All of them, did you say?" "Whatever dances are popular in the court." "I understand. But it will take several months. Is that acceptable to you?" "Yes, of course." "Very well, then. Sign here." And with that, the prince's education began. On Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, the prince learned stately court dances, while on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays, he attended Ralghia's fencing school. It took half a year. Every month on the first of the month, when it was time to pay for stabling his horses, all the prince had to do was sign. The same was true whenever it was time to pay the salaries of the driver and the footmen. Then there was the time the horses got sick. Fortunately, a man came by from Ralghia's veterinary services, and he took care of everything. Finally, the day came. The fencing instructor called him one of the finest swordsmen in the kingdom, and the dance master proclaimed him as brilliant as the great Terpsichore herself. The prince was ready. He rode to the palace in his fine carriage, and his skin glowed thanks to several treatments at Ralghia's spa. In his lap were lavish gifts for King Lorenzo, Queen Isidora, and Princess Portia, gifts the prince had purchased from Ralghia's emporium. The prince with the shiny hair arrived at the castle and was shown inside. But instead of being led into the throne room, as he expected, he was escorted into an antechamber and made to sit down in front of a strange woman. A scary woman. Her eyes were solid black, a sign she carried the black fire within her. The tips of her fingers were black too. Her skin was pale, almost transparent, and the veins showed through her skin, black as tar, because the blood that flowed through her veins was black. She looked savage, dangerous, and fierce, and yet she was strangely beautiful. "Who are you?" the prince asked, trying to sound brave. "I am Ralghia, the bill collector," she said. "You owe 500,000 sovereigns." "What? That can't be!" Ralghia snapped her fingers to summon her men, and they laid their bills before the prince. Dozens of bills bearing his signature. He'd lost track of them. And they were all in the thousands, tens of thousands. The prince added up the numbers in his head and realized that what Ralghia said was true. "But I don't have that kind of money," he protested. "Then you leave me no choice. I'm afraid I'll have to seize your assets, all your lands and everything on them, all that you own." Ralghia held out a piece of paper and smiled sweetly. "Sign here," she said. The prince sighed and stumbled out of the room, numb and dumbfounded. As he staggered out of the castle, he realized he had lost everything, and never once had he laid eyes on the princess. He had nothing left. The next morning, the street cleaners found the body of the prince with the shiny hair. Ralghia gave everything the prince had, all his lands and possessions, to the royal treasury. King Lorenzo and Queen Isidora were delighted because she had doubled the size of the kingdom in a single day. As promised, Ralghia kept only 1/10 of the money for herself. She spirited the money off in a witch's trunk and sent it flying to her own castle far to the north, while she stayed behind in the court of King Lorenzo and Queen Isidora as they waited for more princes to come. And they did come, dozens of them, all seeking the hand of the Porcelain Princess. Each time, Ralghia dealt with them the same way. Some were easy to handle, while others were more difficult, but they all succumbed in the end, for deep down, they believed they were not good enough for the princess. Each time, Ralghia turned their lands and their wealth over to the royal treasury, making the king and queen richer and richer. She made sure to take no more than 1/10 of the money for herself, spiriting it away to her distant castle. Ralghia also kept very good records. She had to, because with every day, King Lorenzo and Queen Isidora got greedier, and they always checked on Ralghia the Witch. to make sure she wasn't cheating them. But Ralghia never went back on her word and gave the king and queen everything she had promised. Within a dozen years, the kingdom was the richest and most powerful in the world. That made the king and queen very happy. Every night they threw parties they did not allow their daughter to attend, and they ate and they drank and they danced, and then they died. This was to be expected. After all this time, their eating, drinking, and dancing had caught up with them. The king collapsed when a chocolate eclair proved too much for him, while the queen fell dead halfway through a pirouette. On that day, the Porcelain Princess came down from her tower, because she was the sole heir of the kingdom. Once the king and queen were safely in the ground, Queen Portia summoned Ralghia to appear before her. "Everything has turned out exactly as you promised it would," Portia said. "The kingdom has increased its wealth 100-fold, and now that the king and queen, the fools, are dead, I alone rule. Our plan has worked very well. Yes, your royal majesty. And you did it in less than a dozen years. I'm impressed." "Thank you, your royal majesty. And of course, you have done very well for yourself," Portia said. "Now I have one last task for you, and I will pay you in advance. I have prepared a horse and cart for you. You may fill it with gold and jewels as much as it can carry, as long as you do not use any magic or witches' tricks. Load it up with as much as is humanly possible, and all that gold and jewelry will be yours if you perform one last task for me, which is leave this place. Take the horse and cart with you and never return to this kingdom, for I have no desire to look on your face again. I see. Ralghia, you alone visited me when I was locked in that tower. You were my everything, my mentor, my sister, my savior, my friend and confidant. Even so, you disgust me. Now go." Any other witch would be insulted to hear those words, but Ralghia grinned in triumph. She had turned the Porcelain Princess into something like her. Portia ruled her kingdom wisely for many years. When the time came, she found herself a husband among the few princes who were left, and she lived happily ever after. As for Ralghia the Witch, she did as the princess asked. She rode off with her gold and jewels and made her way to her castle. She had no plans to return to that kingdom, but this was not a problem for her, because the world is a large place, and she had many more opportunities for mischief. Ralghia the Witch danced among the gold coins, among the blood-red rubies, and laughed as she wondered where she'd go next. She, too, planned to live happily ever after. "The end," Janet said as she flipped the page on her notepad. "I liked that one," her daughter answered as she snuggled in her bed. "I thought you would. But Mommy's tired and needs rest. No more stories tonight, okay?" "Okay, Mommy." Janet turned out the light and kissed her daughter on the forehead. "Good night, Natalie." "Good night, Mommy."